And turn to turn to Proverbs, there we go, right book. Chapter 23, Proverbs chapter number 23. It's been a while, but we're going to get back into the series tonight about raising your children, parenting. Wisdom about parenting from God's book of wisdom of Proverbs. And lately we've been studying the right methods for parenting. How to achieve the right results. If you want to achieve the right results and reach the right goal, you need to employ the right methods. And so right now we're talking about the methods of communication. And there are three that we've been highlighting here from Proverbs. Three very important methods of communication that we must use as parents in raising our children. And by the way, these are not just for parents, okay? So all of these methods that we're talking about have a broader application. So this is for everybody in some fashion. We all need to understand how to communicate effectively and the importance of these kinds of communication. But specifically, we're focusing on how parents must employ these methods in achieving the right results with their children. If you want to achieve the right results, you have to use the right tools. There's been a few times where I have tried to do a job and I didn't have the right tool. Having the right tool makes all the difference, doesn't it? You ever have one of those moments where you find, what? They make a tool for that? Wow! Think about all the time and effort, blood, sweat, and tears it would have saved me if I'd have just had that tool. Just recently, I got this desire to buy an impact wrench because one of those battery-powered ones, because I'm getting tired, my old age. I'm getting tired of using a big wrench to get the bolts off of the bottom of my mower deck so I can change or sharpen my blades. So I've decided, it'd be really nice to have the right tool, just an impact wrench and, there it comes off. That'd be nice. Well, tonight, I want to give you a tool and put it in your toolbox as a parent that will make a big difference in getting this job done, parenting, for the glory of God. So we've talked about three kinds of communication. Okay, so we have, first of all, instruction. Instruction is very important. That's where we teach our children. We give them the wisdom of God's Word, and we teach them how to apply that wisdom to their lives. So a lot of times we would think of instruction as telling our children what they should do. And then there's another side of that coin of instruction, though, and it's called reproof. And this is a very important kind of communication as well. It is essential, it is necessary. Instruction is not enough. We must combine it with reproof. Reproof is telling our children what not to do. And recently we've been talking about reproof. Reproof is saying no when necessary and holding our children accountable to do right. Okay, so we have instruction, we have reproof, and tonight we are going to talk about entreaty. Entreaty. And entreaty can be used for both instruction and reproof, but it'll take both of them to the next level. It's kind of like going from a manual wrench to an impact wrench in your parenting. Okay, so let's take a look tonight at entreaty. First of all, let's define our terms. What is entreaty? Well, the dictionary defines the verb to entreat as to make an earnest request or heartfelt appeal, to ask urgently, or plead with someone to persuade them. All right, so that could be a dictionary definition of entreaty. It is when we practice that kind of communication, which should be characterized by an earnest request, a heartfelt appeal. We ask somebody urgently, or we plead with them to persuade them to a certain course of action. It can be used to amplify both instruction and reproof. And the interesting thing here is that the word entreaty itself is not used in the book of Proverbs, but we have a wonderful example of it in our text here tonight, Proverbs chapter 23, and we're going to be focusing on verses 15 through 28. In these verses, we see a father instructing his son. And in this instruction of his son, he is employing this very important tool of communication called entreaty. And he's using it to great effect. And so let's just go ahead and read through the passage, and then we're going to walk through it, and I'm going to bring out for you tonight the essentials of entreaty, so we can understand how this works and how to use it. Verse number 15. My son, if thine heart be wise, my heart shall rejoice, even mine. Yea, my reins shall rejoice when thy lips speak right things. Let not thine heart envy sinners, but be thou in the fear of the Lord all the day long. For surely there is an end, and thine expectation shall not be cut off. Hear thou, my son, and be wise, and guide thine heart in the way. Be not among winebibbers, among riotous eaters of flesh. For the drunkard and the glutton shall come to poverty, and drowsiness shall clothe a man with rags. Hearken unto thy father that begat thee, and despise not thy mother when she is old. Buy the truth, and sell it not. Also wisdom and instruction and understanding. The father of the righteous shall greatly rejoice, and he that begetteth a wise child shall have joy of him. Thy father and thy mother shall be glad, and she that bare thee shall rejoice. My son, give me thine heart, and let thine eyes observe my ways. For a whore is a deep ditch, and a strange woman is a narrow pit. She also lieth in wait as for a prey, and increaseth the transgressors among men. Let's pray together, shall we? Father, I pray tonight that you would open our understanding from this passage of Scripture on how to do this kind of effective communication as parents with our children. And Father, this may be applicable specifically to parents tonight, but Father, I pray that you would help us all to understand these truths and to make use of them however it would be appropriate in our own lives. And then also I pray that you would help us to respond the right way when we find ourselves on the receiving end of entreaty. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so let's take a look in this passage here tonight at the essentials of entreaty. What is entreaty and what makes it powerful? What makes it more like a power tool than a manual tool? Okay? Number one, there is the power of personal connection. There is the power of personal connection. What am I talking about there? I'm talking about appealing to someone on the basis of a personal relationship that you have with that person. And this is especially effective for parents with their children, because the bond between children and their parents is one of the strongest, the most powerful of all human bonds. Okay, so entreaty starts with sitting down and looking that child in the eye and reminding that child who he or she is to you. That you are my son. That you are my daughter. Okay, so let's take a look at what the example here of the writer, of the author of this chapter here in Proverbs. Look at verse number 15. Notice how he begins this entreaty. He says, my son. So you see right there, he is addressing his son directly, and he is calling him by his title. He's saying, son, I want you to listen to me. Would you drop down to verse number 22? He says, hearken unto thy father that begat thee. Says, hey, I want you to remember, I am the Father that gave you life. And that's a very important reason for you to listen to what I am about to say. Take a look at verse number 26. Again, he says, my son. This appeal is found throughout this passage. And the power behind this appeal is love. Is love. This father says, hey, you are my son. And what I'm about to say to you is very important because you are very important to me. That is a powerful kind of communication. First of all, there is the power of personal connection. Secondly, there is the power of adult interaction and inclusion. The power of adult interaction and inclusion. Would you look at verse number 15? He says, my son, if thine heart be wise, my heart shall rejoice, even mine. Yea, my reins shall rejoice when thy lips speak right things. What am I talking about here? The power of adult interaction and inclusion. I'm talking about having a man-to-man conversation with your son, or a mother to daughter, woman to woman, I guess is what you call that, a woman-to-woman conversation between a mother and her daughter. It's when you treat your child like an adult. And you have that kind of communication like you would with another adult. And in so doing, you are helping your child to mature and to transition to the adult world. So here we see in verse 15, you see this father saying to his son, hey son, let's sit down and let's have a conversation about wisdom. Let's talk about what it means to live a life of wisdom. I want you to know wisdom, and I want you to know how important it is to me that you walk in wisdom. So there is a power to that kind of communication. This father is not talking down to his son. He is bringing his son up to his level, and they are talking man to man. That is a powerful form of communication that we can use with our children, especially as they are getting older. Okay, now this probably isn't going to work really well with your 3-year-old. I mean, you could try it, Son, let's have a conversation about wisdom. And he's thinking about, what am I going to do in the next 5 seconds? But as your child gets older, this becomes important. In fact, the older your child gets, the more important entreaty becomes in your parenting toolbox. Okay, so there's the power of adult interaction and conclusion. Number 3, there is also the power of personal transparency. The power of personal transparency, where as a parent you are sharing your motives and your feelings with your child. Because your child needs to know what makes you tick. Your child needs to know what you really care deeply about. And they need to hear that come out of your mouth. They need to hear why you care so much, in particular, about whatever subject you are discussing with your child at that moment. They need to know how much you are saddened and burdened when they sin. They need to hear from your lips how much joy and pride and love you feel when they make right choices and when they do what is right. They need to hear how you desire them to turn out. And that you really care. And that it's really important to you. Would you look again into this passage and let's take a look at this power of personal transparency. Look again at verse 15. He says, my son, if thine heart be wise, my heart shall rejoice, even mine. I want you to know, son, if you walk in wisdom, you will bring joy to my heart. As a matter of fact, he emphasizes that. Yeah, my heart, son, the heart of your dad, is going to rejoice. Look again at verse 16. He says, yea, my reins shall rejoice when thy lips speak right things. When I hear wisdom coming out of your mouth, when I hear you speaking in adult, mature, wise fashion, that will bring joy to my reins. What are reins? Reins is a word for the kidneys or the internal organs, which were in ancient times considered to be the seat of the emotions. Okay, so he's saying, my heart will rejoice. I will have deep felt rejoicing when you do right, when you make right choices. So, this father is sharing his feelings. Drop down into verse number 24. He says it again. He says, the father of the righteous shall greatly rejoice, and he that begetteth a wise child shall have joy of him. Thy father and thy mother shall be glad, and she that bare thee shall rejoice. How often do you share with your children what will give you joy in their lives? You know, I'm just thinking about that. Isn't it often true as parents that a lot of our communication focuses on what does not give us joy in the behavior of our children? I mean, we can oftentimes focus on what we don't like. And our kids do need to hear about that too. I mean, when they sin, like I said, they need to hear how disappointed and how saddened and how burdened we are and how we are praying for them because we're not pleased at the choices that they're making. If they're making wrong choices, they need to be hearing that. But also, if they're making right choices, they need to be hearing about the joy that it brings to our hearts. And that can be something that's easy to just forget to express. You know, I've worked with children over the years who are really messed up. You know why they're really messed up? Because all they ever hear from their parents is about how they mess up. If all your kids ever hear from you is about how they mess up, they will be messed up. So they also need to hear praise. They need to be praised when they do right. You can tell them about the joy that it brings to your heart. Also, I want to say under this point, there are appropriate forms of transparency, like we see right here in this passage, and there are also inappropriate forms of transparency. You know, sometimes parents are too transparent with their children and they talk to their kids about things that they shouldn't talk to their kids about. You know, and in so doing, they lay burdens upon their children that their kids are not ready to bear. I mean, if all you've got left in the bank is $5, that's probably not something that the kids need to hear about. Okay? It might be that all you have in the bank is $5, but if you lay that burden on them, you know, no, Johnny, you can't have any cereal today because all we have is $5. I mean, that's not going to help little Johnny. It's just going to put a burden that he can't carry. He's a kid. He's not ready to carry an adult burden. So there's inappropriate forms of transparency, and that means as parents we need wisdom ourselves to know what to share and what not to share. But certainly what we see in this passage is very appropriate transparency about our desires for them and the joy that we find in the choices that they make when they choose to do right. Now let's go on to the next point. There's also the power of persuasive imperatives. The power of persuasive imperatives. What do I mean by that? I'm talking about specific direction about what to do or what not to do. And you'll notice on the slide, I highlighted, I bold-faced and underlined the next two words. What are the next two words? And why. Okay? And why. And that is so important, and that is the reason that many times young people don't do right, because they never understood why it was important to do right. So our imperatives become persuasive when they understand the reasons behind them. Would you look at that with me in this passage? Look at verse 17. He says, "Let not thine heart envy sinners, but be thou in the fear of the Lord all the day long." So there's an imperative. It says, son, do not envy sinners. Don't wish you were like them. Don't imitate them. Don't copycat them. Don't walk in the path that they walk in, but rather you live in the fear of the Lord. There's a command from a dad to his kid. But now look at verse 18. For, here's the reason. Surely there is an end, and thine expectation shall not be cut off. Because if you will stay away from that path, and if you'll walk in the path of the fear of the Lord, you will be glad one day. Because that's the path of blessing. I mean, you might say no to temptation, and to sin, and to the attractions of this world, but you will not regret it in the long run. So he gives a reason. Drop down to verse number 20. Look at verse 20. Be not among winebibbers, among riotous eaters of flesh. So there's another command. Son, why don't you listen to me? Don't hang out with people who are swilling booze. And people who are holding riotous feasts and gluttonizing and all that kind of stuff. Don't run with that crowd. Why not? Verse 21. There's a reason. For the drunkard and the glutton shall come to poverty, and drowsiness shall clothe a man with rags. Because that's a path for personal destruction. I mean, you walk on that road with those people, and they're living it up and, squandering their substance in riotous living, and eventually, like the prodigal son, you'll find yourself in the hog pen feeding the hogs. So stay away from that path. Don't go with those people. All right, drop down to verse number 23. Verse number 23, he says, buy the truth and sell it not. Also wisdom and instruction and understanding. So there's another command. It says, hey, this is what you need to do. Buy truth. Okay, so when you go to the marketplace of life, you choose those things that are true and you take those things to yourself and reject the other stuff. Why? He goes on to explain, because first of all, give your parents joy. So there are lots of imperatives in this passage, but they're also backed up by understanding. And I also put down there in the notes that each one of those is prefaced by a personal appeal. That's another thing that makes these imperatives persuasive. Look at that with me, okay? So take a look. Notice in this passage, okay? We started at verse 15. And notice that he doesn't give a command until verse 17. So verses 15 and 16 are all personal appeal from the Father to the Son. Before he ever gets around to laying a command upon the Son, he appeals to him personally. He sets the stage for that command by reinforcing the relationship. And those personal appeals are interspersed again throughout the passage. Look at verse number 19. Hear thou, my son, and be wise, and guide thine heart in the way. So there's a personal appeal. Verse 20, there's the command. Before the command, there's a personal appeal. Okay, look at verse 23. There's the command. Buy the truth and sell it not. Look back up to verse 22. Hearken unto thy father that begat thee, and despise not thy mother when she is old. There's the personal appeal. Okay, so before the command is given, there is the persuasive appeal personally. This father wisely spends just as much time in this passage strengthening the personal bond between him and his son as he does upon administering correction. That's an important balance in parenting. There's wisdom there. Okay, so correcting your child is not just about, it's not just, grabbing your kid and hauling him off and giving him a spanking and then sending him on his way. No, that's wrong, okay? That's not how to do it. It's spending time personally with that child before you give correction, after you give correction, strengthening the personal bond. That makes this kind of communication powerful and effective. So, the power of persuasive imperatives. Let's keep going. There's also the power of heartfelt communication. The power of heartfelt communication. Verse 26, maybe the most important verse in the passage. My son, give me thine heart, and let thine eyes observe my ways. Give me thine heart. That's what you call heart-to-heart communication. That is an appeal, again, that is based upon love and trust. The Father is saying to His Son, I want you to trust me on this. That's what He's saying when He says, give me your heart. He's saying, I want you to put your heart into my keeping, and I want you to trust me with your heart, because I'm going to take care of it. I'm not going to lead you the wrong direction, because your heart is very important to me. I want the very best for you. And so I'm going to share some wisdom with you here, and it may seem difficult. It might not seem really easy, but I want you to trust me on this, because I'm not going to lead you astray. I want you to put your life and your happiness into my keeping, because I love you more than anyone else in this world. I think this is a very powerful way to appeal to our children, specifically when it comes to affairs of the heart. As your kids get older and they start, noticing the opposite sex and starting to wonder about, things like, liking somebody or falling in love with somebody or pursuing a relationship with somebody. As a parent, there's going to be some times where you have to weigh in and say, I don't think this is the right one, or I don't think this is the right time. So there's going to be times as a parent where you will very likely have to put the brakes on something, and you want to raise up your child in such a way that they are willing to trust you with their heart. That they're willing to say, okay, Dad, Mom, I'll trust you to let me know when it is the right time, or when it is the right person for me to pursue. And until then, I'll be patient, and I'll put my heart into your keeping. We need to have these kinds of conversations with our kids and guide them in these processes. That's a part of the role of a mom or a dad. This father's saying, give me your heart. I want you to trust your heart in my keeping, because I care about you. I want the best for you. That is heart-to-heart communication. Powerful. Notice also in verse number 26, there is the power of personal example. The power of personal example. He says, let your eyes observe my ways. I want you to see what I do. I want you to see what I don't do. And I want you to understand why or why not. And your example will lend power to your instruction. If you live it, what you teach will be much more powerful to your child. If you don't live it, your child will take what you teach as just an idealistic recommendation. I've mentioned this illustration before, but I'll never forget, in our first ministry in Savannah, there was a kid who was caught smoking in the bathroom. And so he was taken to the office, and his mother was called, who was a smoker. And she said to her son, "Son, how many times have I told you not to do what I do, but to do what I say?" It doesn't work that way. No wonder why it was her kid that was caught smoking in the bathroom. There is a connection. Because your kids will observe your ways. Boy, isn't that convicting as a parent? Your kids are observing your ways. What are they seeing? Boy. Are you setting the right example? Are you steering them in the right direction? Do they see that you're walking in the path of wisdom? Do they see that you buy the truth and sell it not? Do they see that you are living in the fear of the Lord rather than chasing after the things of this world? Paul had this kind of power with his son in the faith, Timothy. He talks about this in 2 Timothy chapter 3. He says, "But thou hast fully known my doctrine." You know what that was? That was what Paul taught Timothy. He says, "You fully know my doctrine." And then he goes on to say, "Manner of life, purpose, faith, long-suffering, charity, patience, persecutions, and afflictions, which came into me at Antioch, at Iconium, at Lystra, what persecutions I endured, but out of them all the Lord delivered me." And then he says in verse 14, "But continue thou in the things which thou hast learned and hast been assured of, knowing of whom thou hast learned them." So, there's one word in 2 Timothy 3:10 for instruction, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 words for personal example. So Paul's personal example made his teaching to Timothy powerful. The power of personal example. I got a couple more, and we'll be done. There's also the power of personal fervency. The power of personal fervency. And this, I'm not pointing you to a specific verse in the passage. It's all throughout the passage. Can't you just hear in this father's tone the urgency and the concern and the love that he has for his son? There is some fervency to this kind of communication. This isn't ho-hum. This isn't, oh well, and, just a passing little conversation in the hallway. No, this is a sit down. This is an eye to eye. This is a heart to heart. And this father puts some intensity into his communication to his child. That makes it more powerful. The Bible talks about how a person's heart will add wisdom to his lips. When you speak from your heart, when you speak with intensity, with fervency, it grabs the attention of your hearers. It makes them pay more careful attention to what you're saying. And then finally, there is the power of personal involvement. The power of personal involvement. I want you to look at verses 15 and 16. He says, "My son, if thine heart be wise, my heart shall rejoice, even mine. Yea, my reins shall rejoice when thy lips speak right things." Drop down to verse number 19. Verse 19, he says, "Hear thou, my son, and be wise, and guide thine heart in the way." Verse 23, "Buy the truth, sell it not, also wisdom, instruction, understanding. The father of the righteous shall greatly rejoice, and he that begetteth a wise child shall have joy of him." And so what is implied in those statements is the father's continuing personal involvement in the life of his son. Okay, because he's appealing him to walk in wisdom. He's saying, hey, if you walk in wisdom, if you walk in the fear of the Lord, I want you to know you will bring joy to my heart. And how would that bring joy to his heart? Because dad is still there involved in his son's life. Dad is in the stands. He's one of the spectators, and he's cheering on his son. He is remaining involved. So this father is not detached from his child. He is intensely involved in the decisions and the choices that his child is making, even into adulthood. He's saying, I want you to know, I'm going to be watching you. I'm going to watch your life. I'm going to be right there with you to see the choices that you make. And I want you to know that when you make the right choices, and when you say the right things, and when you buy the right things from the marketplace of life, and when you stay away from temptation, and you keep away from evil people, I want you to know I'm going to be glad. That's powerful communication. That's entreaty. So here's a couple of applications. Number one, how are you doing at using the method of entreaty as a parent? You know, if you're going to practice this form of communication, it's going to happen in some times when you sit down and you make a point of spending quality time communicating with your child. Do you ever do that? So that's why I say this method is best used with older children. You know, the older your kids get, the more important this becomes, this kind of communication becomes. Although you can start when they're young. Okay? You can practice this as much as their attention span will allow. But as they get older, and as they start facing some of the biggest choices that they will ever make in their lives, and you think about that, at what age do most people make the biggest decisions of life? Well, in our society, it's in their late teens and early 20s. That's when they start making decisions about, you know, where they're going to go to school or college or whatever, what degree they're going to try to get, what job they're going to pursue, who they're going to marry. All that kind of stuff is being decided in those times. Is that a time for parents to be detached or involved in their children's lives? That's a time for them to be involved. That's a time for them to be giving this kind of wise guidance and heartfelt instruction. But it will require heart, time, and effort to communicate this way. So we have to develop these skills to succeed with our children, and it won't be easy. Some parents excel at communication naturally more than others. For some, it's a struggle to communicate what's really in their hearts. But you got to make the effort. You have to make the attempt. You know, there have been times where I have worked with kids, and I knew in my heart that if I could just get that child together with his dad or his mom, but most often the dad, okay? If I could just get that child, that teenager, together with his dad, and if his dad could just from a standpoint of humility and heart, share his heart with his son and tell him about the joy that he finds in his son and build up his son and minister to his son and admit his mistakes to his son. If I could just get a dad to sit down and look his son in the eye and have that kind of transparency and heart in talking to his son, that wandering son or daughter could be reclaimed. But sometimes it just doesn't happen. Sometimes parents have the best intention, and they sit down to talk with their kid, and it becomes more of a lecture, you know, where you just do all the talking, and you know, then at the end of 45 minutes you say, well, I'm really glad we had this conversation. Child walks away thinking, yeah, it was more like a monologue, not a dialogue. Oh, as parents, we need to work on the dialogues, drawing out what's in the heart of our child. and saying, my son, give me thine heart. No parent is going to be perfect at this. You may not get the gold star for entreaty anytime soon, but the good news is that this tool is available, and you can use it. And if you will use it, it'll take your parenting to the next level. The question is, will you put it to good use? Well, just a second question here tonight before I close, and that is, when others entreat you, do you receive it well? Because there may be some times where people want to sit down with you and they want to share with you what's on their heart. Do you take it well? With a good spirit? David said in Psalm 141, verse 5, let the righteous smite me, it shall be a kindness, and let him reprove me, it shall be an excellent oil, which shall not break my head, for yet my prayer also shall be in their calamities. In other words, if I need it, I'm ready to hear it. That's a very humble response, isn't it? Because what do we do in our flesh when people want to share things that we really need to hear? We have a tendency to say, I don't think I really want to hear that. Or am I the only person who's like that? I don't think so. I think we all do that, don't we? It's like, we become very defensive right off the bat and, want to push back, and then we just need to learn how to let down our guard, especially when it's somebody that we know and we love and we trust, and they want to share with us something that's on their heart, something that they've prayed over, and they need to share with us. Then we receive it in this same way. And that also is the path of wisdom. Let's bow our heads tonight.